There we go.
We are so excited to have Kim Wilson and Leah Miller with us to share some of the experiences that they have had with service learning. And they're going to talk about projects that are quite different from one another. And another contrast that you will notice is that the projects that Kim discusses with us will be ones that she actually has done using distance learning. The project that Leah is going to talk with us about is one that was very, very successful, was done in school in person, but it's one that Leah can truly envision doing through distance learning if the conditions would require that. And so we know how hard everybody has been trying to imagine what service learning would look like using virtual instruction. This is a chance to really interact with some folks that have tried it or are planning to try it and have also a lot of experience in service learning. As we talk about this, keep in mind that we just finished identifying many different forms of service learning, that whereas folks sometimes jump to the conclusion that the only legitimate way to be engaged in service learning is if you are face-to-face with clients who are in profound need. So people think about helping the Mid-Ohio Food Bank or serving at a soup kitchen, things of that nature. And while those efforts are tremendously valuable and important, we're wanting folks to have a much broader view of what's possible. So projects which raise awareness are equally valuable. Projects which encourage advocacy are very valuable. And indeed, projects that bring different generations or different grade levels together are tremendous, because if you have an identified authentic need for relationship building and community building in a school district, then kids can use almost any topic where they're gaining important knowledge and use that as a springboard to build relationships. And that's really where Leah's project begins. So why don't we start, Leah, with yours, and you can describe what we're talking about with Shake Pals, and then I know that you all will go back and forth and talk a little bit about your entry events, your curriculum connections, and the impact that you feel that you had.
Okay, so I'm Leah Miller, and I teach English at Upper Arlington High School. In the last several years, I've taught seniors, which seniors are their own challenge, especially in May. Sometimes they're not as engaged as we'd like them to be. And so when I started thinking about our project, it came out of a real need to, one, engage the students, and then two, connect it obviously to our curriculum that we already have in place. So we teach part of the 11-12 Ohio Learning Standards includes a Shakespeare piece. And so we decided to put that at the senior year. And so we teach Hamlet and Macbeth to seniors. And so sometimes that I have found in past years that students, when we wait, especially until the end of the year, it's just they might not be as engaged as they are about some of their other senior activities. So I thought that would be a really great place to start engaging students with some sort of service learning piece or connection. And so what ended up happening, which I highly recommend, is I found a partner. And that's where this idea started. And so if you can find someone to help you through this project or to collaborate with, my partner was Kelly Teteris from Hastings Middle School. Many of you know her. She teaches gifted, 6th grade gifted at Hastings Middle School. And so she had a class. And so we started chatting about ways we could connect. We thought providing authentic relationships like Ellen was talking about, multi-generational, and in particular, kids who would be in the district, right? So they're in 6th grade now, but they would be seniors at some point, some very soon point, and then seniors who would graduate and maybe come back even to the community. We thought an investment in that was really important and would be service. So we decided to pair our 6th graders, Kelly's 6th graders, with my seniors, and we called them to study Shakespeare. And they created what instead of pen pals, we called them Shake Pals. And we connected, each student in my class was connected with a student from Kelly's class. And we gave them some Google Docs. We introduced them to Shakespeare. We introduced them to each other several times. They met several times throughout the year. This shared doc, they were able to connect with each other that way. They were able to connect in person. And all of these little activities led up to the culminating celebration, the culminating performance, where they took some pieces of Shakespeare's work and they performed them in front of a live audience of friends and parents and students. And so it was a collaborative performance. It was sixth graders and seniors working and performing Shakespeare's pieces together. So it was a really engaging, they definitely learned a lot too. I mean, I will talk about that more later. But it was an engaging experience, I think, from both sides. So I know that what Ellen talked about that being a different kind of service, because it hits on the emotional, socio-emotional needs of students. We don't necessarily see that as maybe service learning, but I would definitely say both sides. I mean, my seniors learned a lot from the sixth graders too, and the sixth graders learned a lot from the seniors. I would say they both saw that as service. So, Kim, you want to talk about your project?
Yeah, so I just want to touch on that being able to use the Google Doc. That's something I've done, like a cross-age project in the past too, and that's something that we did to communicate with we were working with first graders, but we would as a class update our Google Doc and then they would check it and do some things on their end. So that's a really good digital way to connect with people and do some sort of teaching and like social emotional connection with others. So that was a great way for distance learning, service learning. Anyways, so I did two projects. The first one.
Yeah, let me interrupt you. Can you introduce yourself and say who you work with?
So my name's Kim Wilson. I teach at the high school in Upper Arlington, and I teach students with multiple disabilities. This year I have 4 students. I can have anywhere between 4 and 8 students, usually around 6. Most of them have Down syndrome or autism, and they are all students who have the potential to become employees at some point. So that's kind of you think about individuals who will be working in the community someday. That's kind of my group of students. So a lot of what we do in school is prepare them to become employees someday. I also teach every subject, grades 9 through 12, and we do transition related things, and then we also work on remedial skills like learning to read, identifying numbers, things like that. So I kind of teach everything, which makes service learning awesome because it can teach everything. It can kind of run the gamut of what you want to work on. So the two projects the first project that we did kind of started out of the fact that school was closed, and we were like, all we do in school is things. We don't learn facts. We don't sit at our computers and do worksheets. We don't look at apps on our iPads. We don't type into the computer. We actually do things. So I was really overwhelmed with thinking about how distance learning was going to translate to the way our program ran. And we do a lot of real jobs and real tasks, and we're working for the office, sorting their attendance, and we're working at Barrington, putting books away in the book room, and we're working at Burbank preschool in their cafeteria. So that's a lot of our day, and when we couldn't do any of that stuff, it was a little overwhelming. So one of my paraprofessionals texted me some article from the paper that she saw, and the one theme you'll see with a lot of my projects is like, oh, this came up and I saw this, how could I translate that to a project, or how could I use that in my classroom, and then could it be a service learning project? So it doesn't always have to be like a service learning project. It could just be something you use in your class. But anyways, this paraprofessional saw this article in the paper, and she said, they're looking for masks in Franklin County, and her husband, Dr. Kevin Olson, passed away 2 years ago. He's a great community member, great doctor, biggest funeral I've ever seen in my lifetime. And she had all of his old scrubs from when he did his residency actually like 50 years ago. And so she was like, I'd like to turn Kevin's scrubs into masks that we could donate. Do you think the kids could do something? And I was like, sure, great. Sounds like a great idea. But I don't know how that's going to work. And so I kind of let her take the lead. And Leah said this too about having partnerships. It's really good to have someone else to do some of the work, because there's a lot of coordination that went on, and she did all of that. So the students cut out squares, and they cut out the strips bias tape, which I learned about for the first time. And they measured it and cut it, and they worked with Miss Olson on drop off and pickup. And then we did a lot of instruction on why it was important to have masks. So that was one project. And then the other project that we did, we had been studying states in our class just at school as something to kind of fill time at the end of the day. So we had a state of the week, and we were learning different stuff, and it was great. It was fine. It was something I wanted to carry over into distance learning as like some sort of normalcy, because it was one thing we could do via distance learning. So we were doing that. We were all planned to do, I scanned everything in. We were all ready to do what we had been doing in school. And then I saw something on the internet about how Ohio State was looking for people to write thank you notes and emails and messages to their hospital workers. And they had a whole website, and you could email them, and it was all digital. And I was like, oh, we could do that. Maybe my class could do that. And then I took it one step further and thought, well, why don't we tie that into what we're doing with the states and write thank you notes to people in hospitals in those states that we're studying. So that way we could review what we've learned, and they can also, they can work on their writing skills and their communication skills and composition and all that sort of thing. And we can also kind of give thanks to people who are working really hard. And so those were the two projects, I guess.
Well, and one point that I want to reinforce for our group is how important it is for teachers to stay open to possibilities, because the projects are all around us. You can tell from what Kim said, especially, that if you just sort of sharpen your antenna a little bit and think about what is percolating in the world that could use some extra response and support and insight, the opportunities present themselves, and the circumstances really become their own entry events almost. And all you have to do is reinforce the importance of the circumstances in order to get the kids interested.
What I was just going to say, staying open to the possibilities, I would just reinforce that. But the process is the same, no matter what the circumstance is. Mm-hmm. And so you found ways to emotionally engage your kids in the project. You were teaching them your standards, the content that they needed to know. You couldn't do Shake House without kids being knowledgeable about Shakespeare and sharing that with the middle school kids. You did not ignore your standards of learning about the states, but you found ways, you just tweaked it so that the work product that the kids were creating was shared with people who needed it, not just turning it in for a grade. And so when you flip that switch with kids, that's when they, it's that intrinsic learning piece. They want to learn, and it's learning that will last. The sixth graders and the seniors will never forget Shakespeare. And your kids, you mentioned a little bit about when your high school kids, Kim, worked with the first graders. And I still, every time I watch the video of your kids working with those first graders, I get shivers. And because it's accomplishing more than one thing at a time. You can teach the content while still building in the social emotional learning. And each of those strengthen the other. When we separate those two things, neither one is as as effective. And your kids were teachers, Kim, well, yours too, Leah, but your kids, maybe for the first time, Kim, were teachers and sharing their skills, their relationship abilities with others who needed it. Those first graders will never forget that experience, ever.
Leah, there's a couple things that we would love for you to talk a little bit about. First of all, we love the entry events that you use to hook interest at the beginning. So if you would talk about that, and also talk about from your perspective, if you can envision doing a similar project through distance learning.
Well, I'll talk about that first because I think this would be a really easy project to translate into a distance learning situation, because my biggest challenge throughout the project was getting kids together, physically getting them together. Not surprisingly, that was one of their favorite parts too, right? Going
sure.
With the sixth graders. However, the bus situation, the buses are expensive, and with liability, we weren't allowed to let the seniors drive. So I had to get a bus every time, except the times that Kim was actually so kind to let some of her aides.
Unless you know the director of the van.
Exactly. It was so nice of her. Actually, that's another byproduct of this conversation, is like service learning allies, you know, like you create this group of people who are willing to help because they see the big picture, they see the goal. So I think, I mean, it's a no-brainer. You could easily connect students. I mean, in fact, I bet lots of teachers are looking for ways to extend their curriculum during distance learning. And so reaching out to teachers and having pen pals of think about any content, that'd be really easy to apply. So, so I think this is, I mean, even a Shakespearean performance, you could do that via Zoom. I mean, I've seen, you know, dance recitals this spring done via Zoom, like, you know, why couldn't you do that? So even the culminating performance could be done in a distance learning environment. As far as entry events, I started by showing students some famous clips, some famous clips of famous actors performing Shakespeare. So Benedict Cumberbatch, David Tennant, people, Kenneth Branagh, people they recognize or know, and they're so passionate about their Shakespearean performances. They all have played Hamlet. They've all, you know, that's like the pinnacle for especially a classically trained British actor, is to play Hamlet. And so to watch them, you know, people they know performing Shakespeare, it sort of gave it a little bit of street credibility, right? So they're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then I said, well, what do you know about Shakespeare? These guys are, you know, want to play him. He is seen as like, this is the pinnacle role of someone's career. Why? What do you know about Shakespeare? And they didn't know a bunch. So I showed them a purposely bad documentary, just a few minutes of a documentary that they, you know, wanted to sleep through. Some did. And then I said, I know you can do better than this. And I just kind of let them go. Who was Shakespeare? And they found a lot of really interesting info. And then I had them in pairs create their own Shakespeare documentary. And they then shared it with the sixth graders. And that's how they introduced the sixth graders to Shakespeare, was through their created documentary. And which was so fun. The sixth graders obviously loved seeing our student productions, because they weren't slick productions, right? They didn't look like the one I produced, which I thought was interesting. And they actually liked the student ones better, right? Because they knew the creators behind those. And they learned something in the process. They learned a lot, you know that. And the most important thing, I think, Kathy, you alluded to this earlier about like authentic audience. The students they feel okay about letting the teacher down. I mean, not okay. They will let a teacher down, right? They don't want to usually, but if they have to, they will. My students would not let the sixth graders down. And so just that shifting that gaze a little bit of our audience, you know, a little bit, it's like, they came in ready. If they were not prepared, they came right up to me and said, I'm not prepared. Can I go in the hall? Or I need to, or they felt, a sense of responsibility for the project that they did not feel when it was just turning it in for me for an assignment, right?
And this conversation, these are the conversations we need to have in education, because what you did in that beginning by showing them something and then challenging them to do better, we could traditionally say, read these 10 pages and answer these 5 questions. And all they're doing is taking what somebody else thought and putting it down. And what you did was raise some curiosity in them. What do I want to know about Shakespeare? I have to take responsibility for it. And then that whole conversation about kids who do well either don't want to let you down or they want the A. You know, they want they want the grade. You change that dynamic by, that wasn't the purpose. They didn't want to let the 6th graders down. And oh, by the way, they'll probably get an A because
because the work's so good. Right.
So I don't care if you call it service learning or not. If you just approached education and made sure those things were present, it's going to be a better experience.
Absolutely.
When you think about the kids reflecting on this process, what were some of the feelings and thoughts that they shared as the projects drew to a close? And both of you can respond to that for sure.
Did you get that? You want me to go?
Oh yeah, yeah.
No, you can go ahead because you were just talking about.
So we reflected, obviously we've reflected at the end, right? Like at the end of any project or any assignment, you do it naturally. But I also did place some reflection throughout. So,
Good.
So every time the students were writing back and forth to their Shake Pals, we stopped and said, read your response. What did you make of that? Right? Mm-hmm. Does that mean that, so if your Shake Pal was confused by what you wrote, maybe you need to clarify, right? Why was your Shake Pal confused? Do you need to include more info? My seniors ended up thinking, they reflected I forced them to reflect throughout the process, so not just at the end, but they ended up really, really respecting the 6th graders. They were like, these 6th graders know a lot. And they weren't expecting that, which I thought was super interesting. They thought they were going to be the experts and the teachers, and that isn't what they found. And they were forced to sort of see that through the reflection throughout the process. And then at the end, I did have them reflect in a more formal paper. I wanted them to get their reflection in writing. So I had them do that more formally at the end. But we were reflecting throughout. I mean, almost daily, honestly, because the project that became their favorite part of the day. Talk about, let's check in with our Shake Pals. Have they written us? What have they said? What do I need to do next? Right? All of those natural sort of reflection pieces became a daily part of our conversation.
That's really helpful. Thanks. How about you, Kim?
So reflection's hard for my students.
I understand.
Communication is hard for my students. One thing that I like to do, and I actually got this idea probably from one of your professional developments, is we take a lot of pictures and make the learning visual throughout the whole process. And then at the end, we go through and look at the pictures and go, okay, well, what were we doing here at this point of the project? Okay, and some of my kids, that's where we stop, is this is what we did. And that's their ability to reflect. And then we talk about, well, what was really hard about that? What was the hardest part about that? And then what was kind of easy about that? And then what did I learn, or how did I grow because of that? So that's kind of something I've taken from the first project that I've ever done. And we kind of do at the end of the school year. We look back at some of the things that we've done, but also we did that with some of the pictures and just knowing that I got a thank you note from one of my students, and she said making the masks was her favorite part of the year. And so just the fact that they're connecting back to what we did was really important. I could have done more reflection, and I know that my time constraints in these 2 projects, because we weren't in school, I was meeting with my students for an hour a day, and to get all this stuff done in an hour a day was short. So I could have done more. I know I would have done more and would do more in the fall when we have longer time, but it just wasn't feasible at this point to do very much reflection. But yeah, I think that especially for if you're working with younger kids, looking at pictures and making learning visual for them and seeing what they remember, because it's also interesting to hear what students remember and what was important to them throughout the process. So I think that's a good tip that I've picked up and that I do with reflection a lot in my class.
One of the moments that I will always remember in that video of your kids with first graders is, and I don't remember the young man's name, but you were asking them questions about how they felt about the project. And he said, I love kids. And he was so sincere. And I thought to myself, he got the project,
Right.
He was gaining mightily by this work that you were doing. But I wonder if at the time and now thinking back, did he come to the realization of that because of the work that you engaged them in? He didn't realize that before, and without that reflection, it was just a really cool moment.
Well, and I like to do a lot of self-reflection too. I'm going to shut my door because I think my kids just came home and that'll be chaos. But a lot of reflection in my teaching too, and just thinking about service learning as a teaching strategy and how important it is and how it kind of grounds everything I do. I know when we talked in the group, someone had asked about, well, how do you meet IUP goals and do service learning at the same time? And it's just really important to realize that this is how you teach. It's not like something you do at the end after all the testing's done because you want to do something fun with your kids. This is how Leah taught Shakespeare. It wasn't like, oh, we're going to go over Shakespeare and then we'll do this fun thing at the end. No, this was how they learned Shakespeare. So it helps me like kind of centralize what I'm doing when I'm doing a million things. It's like, okay, we're going to make masks. How can everything I have to teach relate to making masks? Oh, we need to learn about cells in the body. Okay, well, how do viruses attack cells? We're wearing masks because there's a virus. Things like that. And then with the thank you notes, what some of the standards are, some of the geography standards are learning characteristics of a region. So how can we connect that, write that in our thank you note? And honestly, I think they might have created some facts to teach the healthcare workers about their state that they may never have known. So forming a sentence, using punctuation, all that stuff. We could do worksheets where we're putting periods at the end of sentences that don't have periods at them, or we can write a letter that's going to go to a real audience. And so I think it's just important to know that it's a way to teach things, and it can be a way to teach a lot of things. And then to connect the social emotional learning and just so many, we used to call them 21st century skills. I don't know what they're called anymore. Learner profile skills. I'm not sure. But, the communication, the organization, the problem solving, the critical thinking. Leah had mentioned, the kids would check their Google Doc and then have to figure out what to do next. That's such a good skill. That's not a language arts standard, but that's something we should be teaching our kids to figure out. Okay, well, what is this isn't something that's planned out. Mrs. Miller is not going to give me the next step. I have to come up with it. So just being able to do those 21st century skills, I don't know what they're called now. My students had to work on, okay, I have cut out all the squares that Miss Olson gives me. Now I have to communicate to her that I'm done, which is a work skill that we work on all the time. And it's on every survey assessment that I ever do about my students. Do they know to ask for more work? Okay, now I have to text Miss Olson and say, I need more squares. Can you pick, I'm gonna leave them on my doorstep. When can you pick them up? And then she would be, to be able to communicate and problem solve and figure out what the next step is really important and is a bonus, but it's also something we should be teaching our kids. So if we can teach the content and those things in the same time, we're doing it right, versus just teaching those things and just saying, don't forget when you're done, with your work, you need to ask for more work, right? Does everyone get it? Okay, next skill. You know, it's like requiring them to do that stuff.
That's very well said, for sure, and a really important message for the work that we're doing. Is there anything either of you would like to add before we close? Because we want to make sure all the highlights are hit that you want to hit.
I think I said this last time too. Just if you're waiting for the perfect time, or just that will never be. So just sort of jumping in. I mean, I was fortunate enough to partner with Kelly, and she's fantastic. And together we just jumped in, and we did not know that every single detail of the project for the year. We jumped in. We met together in the fall. We sort of had a rough idea, and we just started. And the project is better in iteration too, you know? So, I think waiting for the perfect time or the perfect piece of curriculum, or when we're not in a pandemic, or none of those things, those are just barriers. You really just have to jump in.
Yeah.
I say that all the time. You're not gonna have every activity and moment and minute planned out when you start. You can have an idea, and then, like you said, stuff presents itself and you just start connecting. Oh, I saw this, let's add this in. Oh, that's right, I had to teach this. How could that kind of does connect, let me pull that in. And your brain will start making those connections as you go. You're not going to have every minute, every second planned out when you start, and it's okay, and you just have to do it and commit to it. And then for me, you know, committing to it, and I'm sure for you too, Leah, like, okay, well, now we've committed to these sixth graders, like, we actually have to do this, and we're gonna actually have to do this, is a challenge, and it's a good challenge for teaching, and it holds you accountable, instead of, like, it's easy to go make copies and read Shakespeare and answer the questions that you always have. That's easy, but it's not the way that students learn all the time. So it's important to just kind of challenge yourself and do something different and hold yourself accountable so that your kids have good learning experiences.
That's so well said. And, you know, we do this work because we feel so strongly that it's good for kids. But anybody that will watch this video and watch your faces when you talk about this kind of work with kids, it's great for teachers too. And these are the moments that you'll remember forever. And, you know, we're just so proud of both of you.
Absolutely.
It is.
We're going to go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, it's invigorating for your teaching to try something like this and do something new and see the way that your kids react. And it'll make you feel kind of renewed as a teacher and not kind of stuck in a rut.
We're glad that you feel that way. We are so glad to call you colleagues and friends. We're going to stop the recording, but hang on for a moment. Don't go away. All right.